why do you think it is that fathers continue to pull ahead in wages, as I think as your paper says, even when mothers are able to bring their hours back up, that the wage gap still persists?
Exactly. So that's an interesting question, and lots of people have tried to think about it in different ways. I think some of it is to what we call selection. So men who are perhaps most stable in terms of employment and earnings and are able to support a family are those who are then going to go ahead and start a family. And it's selection into fatherhood could be driving some of it. Some of it is also by need, especially in a country like the US. So if you have a family, you find out quickly that that can be expensive. You have to provide insurance. You might have to save for the children's education, daycare, all kinds of expensive things. So dads need to work more hours, I think they find, that in order to provide for the family. Some of it is employer attitudes. There's many studies that have looked at what employers think. They look at the pool of workers and they say, "Oh, who should I promote? Well, this guy, he's gonna stay. He has a family and a mortgage, and he's the guy that I want to be maybe promoting. Maybe he deserves a raise. He's working hard to provide for the family." So I think it's a combination of factors, really.
Yeah, and I guess to dig more in then on the mother's side, what were the things that you were seeing that even when we're getting our hours or they're getting their hours back, that the wage parity isn't there, that there's still a discrepancy? Like, what is it more like of like a culture of the workplace, a structure with like schedule, like rigid schedules and expectations? What kind of drives that being the cause?
I know. So that again, I think it's a combination of factors that I think our workplaces are still o- often geared around this idea that at least one parent has more flexibility, or maybe there's a stay-at-home parent, and the workplace expects the worker to be there, be doing a lot of FaceTime, and it turns out that school schedules don't really operate the way as the workplace schedule. So somebody has to be able to kind of take more time off and work fewer hours. So some of it comes from those dynamic effects of there being, I think there's a default parent who often happens to be the mother, and that reflects in the workplace. I'm sure there's a lot of attitudes again by the employers if they're thinking about again like who should we train for leadership role. I want to train someone who's going to be there, who's going to if their vision is that mothers are more likely to drop out or start working part-time, that affects those attitudes as well. And some big part, I think, is just that the parenting hours and the work hours, they only have 24 hours a day and all pulling from the same 24 hours.
I'm curious then on that. Do you think with I think a common critique, maybe the first thing you hear when people talk about the gender pay gap is, oh well, maybe women choose jobs that just pay less and this and that. How much of this, like what you were just discussing, do you think is more of like societal pressures from things like motherhood because of the structures of the workplace that kind of force this rather than it being an individual choice?
Yeah, so exactly. Like if you are I think it's definitely true. And if you're thinking long term that family is in the cards, then perhaps you are going to think about jobs that will allow more flexibility. So we have a lot of women in the teaching roles and in the public sector and jobs like that perhaps allow a little bit more temporal flexibility when needed. So there's some of that. And then the question is like, why, why don't we have more jobs that have more family friendly hours and more flexibility? I think that's sort of that those are the norms. I think in the US that seems to be the norm. If you look at many other countries, the work week is fewer hours, the vacation times are much longer. There's sort of inbuilt societal understanding that families take more time, and here we have often very minimal annual vacation time. And that's interesting how that, like, where that came from and why that hasn't really changed.
Yeah, and on more of the things that your paper found, I know you looked at, I believe, both college educated and non-college educated. Could you kind of go into like how much of a role education played? Did the discrepancy still exist? What did you find?
Yes, so the it's interesting. Like everyone always thinks that college education can solve so many problems. I will, earn higher wages. I'll have a nicer job. Many great things do come with college education. So it's interesting to note that sometimes things don't look much rosier for the college educated women than they do for the non-college educated. But the reason is that college educated men are just really high earners with fast career trajectories, especially during the time period that we looked at. That sort of a lot of it is coming just from the fact that the men's careers take off soon after graduation and continue growing. And so the pay gaps are actually much larger among the college educated. They grow much faster and stay much larger. For the non-college educated, again, one might think, oh, that doesn't look so bad, compared the gender pay gap, it's much smaller. But that comes from the fact that the non-college educated men aren't doing so well in the labor market. Their real wages haven't increased. Their jobs are the kind that don't really lead to a lot of promotions and great deal of earnings increases over time. So yes, the gender pay gap may be smaller among the parental pay gap among the non-college graduates, but that's again coming from the lower earnings of the men.
And then how could you detail kind of how this looks throughout the different stages of the family cycle? Like how much of the gap gets made up as the child gets older, how much is even possible for them to make up, versus remains.
Yeah, so I mean, try to think about what good way to summarize it. So when we start in so most of the analysis start in the early tw to mid 20s. For college educated, we try to start right after the college ends and then try to understand what happens um, to the pay gap in the ensuing years. So what happens so pretty quickly after college grads graduate, the pay gap starts growing right away, and then continues to grow actually into the sort of peak earnings years, which tend to be in the mid 40s, kind of around 45, and then the pay gap flattens. Same thing happens on the non-college side, but things happen earlier. The peak happens earlier, and sort of the big bulk of the pay gap is already set in when people are about 35 to 39 years old. And then if we think about the family life cycle in that, the pay gap stays quite large until the kids start to be in middle school and start kind of heading into high school. That's typically happens when the parents are in their mid to late 40s. And then some small shrinkage in the pay gap happens between moms and dads, especially in the very end of our sample when in this men are in their 50s, mid 50s. There's a little bit more shrinkage between the moms and versus non-moms, but similar sort of time pattern. That first we see very large increases in the pay gap and the very modest declines as the kids start to be in the middle school, high school, and heading to college.
And something I was really curious to ask, I'm not even sure if your paper looked exactly into it, if you've done research on it specifically, but with motherhood, maybe comparing to women that are not mothers, how much like does motherhood cause a gap there? And even when, your child gets older and maybe moves out of the home, are they like mothers ever able to even close the gap between women who never have kids?
Yes, so the moms versus never moms, there definitely is a gap there as well. Um, and that's it does it's not nowhere near as big as the gap between moms versus dads. It's I would say about 30% pay gap at the big largest point when women are in their moms and non-moms are in their late 30s and early 40s. Moms make about 40%, sorry, 30% less than non-moms. And a lot of that is explained by the moms working fewer hours. Their labor market experience is not growing as fast. They work fewer hours. And then as the moms can increase their hours again, kids are getting older, you don't have to work as much part-time, you actually can take on more of a full-time role perhaps. That gap shrinks to about, let's say, so 12 to 15%. So it doesn't ever fully disappear, at least for the college educated moms, but it does shrink.
And then the last question that I have, and this is obviously, the $1 million question. What are the sort of things that would alleviate the pressures that cause these gaps? Is it maybe like policy wise, things like universal child care or paid family leave? Is it more like cultural in the workplace, like some of the things we talked about? Like, how do we correctly address the issue?
Yes, that is the $1 million question. And if I had the perfect answer, I would offer it. But there are many ways in which we could improve things. So I think definitely having having paid family leave and having access to affordable childcare are two very important things. With the family leave, I think it's important to think about not just that the mothers are taking the family leave, but to the extent that that can be shared, perhaps by policy decisions, like it becomes a take it or leave it, and every parent should be expected to take some part of that leave, that would reduce the effect of just women taking family leave, since that can also be detrimental, especially if the leaves are long. Um, and then that sort of question about attitudes, I think it also is the same thing with the fathers taking leave. There should be some expectation in the workplaces that if you become a father, you take leave. It's not something that should be penalized. It should not be thought as a negative thing for parents to take time off. Claudia Goldin, who's one of the co-authors of the paper has provided some interesting ideas about the division of work in the US workplaces. That if you think about the types of jobs that are most equal in terms of pay gaps, they're often those where work can be easily passed on from one team member to another. So being away for a little bit or not being there all the time with lot, here I am in the workplace. Those types of jobs can provide a lot better balance and less gap in terms of the gender pay gaps in the workplace. So again, not all jobs are probably such that can be transformed in that way, but if we can think about more flexible workplace practices that allow people to take time off without huge penalties, that could definitely help.
Yeah, and before I let you go, I always ask people this. I found you obviously through your co-author, so I'm not sure if this applies to you. But I give people the floor. I don't. If you have like work you want to shout out, your social medias, like a website, anything like that, you can have the floor to let people know if you'd like.
Yes, so I work at the Wellesley Centers for Women at Wellesley College, which is a women's college, and we do a lot of interesting work on different policies. So anyone who wants to look me up, it's pretty easy to find the Wellesley Centers for Women, Sari Kerr. All my research is posted on my website, and I'm happy to chat about any of the policy related issues that we have studied in the last several years.